City Girl Meets Country Dog Man, as told to Peter Bernard, read by Madeline Starr. When I first moved out of the city to my own house, I didn't realize how much of a lifestyle change it would be to have to drive for 3 hours every day. But as much as I complained about having to be in the car, I learned the hard way that it's better than walking. And that's a lesson that was taught to me by Dogman. I'm a hardworking executive in a Fortune 500 company, and even though my daddy got me my first job, I still got fired from it and had to start over, competing against my own family's company. I bought them and put them out of business before I was 27. I can say with confidence that everything I have, I earned on my own. Yet I know that won't stop the haters out there from being jealous of me or acting in a spiteful way toward me. We all do what we have to in order to survive. It's just that the way I survive is by being the best in the world. At least, that's how I survived before I met my guy, Danny. He showed me that there actually is a point to relaxation, and there actually is a function for empathy and even love. Danny is the only reason I got the house in the first place. Before him, I thought moving out of town meant moving to Brooklyn. He's an artist. He works at home, and he reached a point where he felt the city had stopped inspiring his art. He was going to move to the country anyway, one way or the other, even if he had to take some place that was really cheap and eat ramen noodles for a year. Buying that house for Danny and myself was really the first time I ever thought about someone else and placed their needs before my own. That is the thing about Danny that terrifies me. He makes me do things that have no profit incentive. I end up doing things just because I hope I can make him happy. How bizarre is that? Obviously, I'm seeing a shrink about it, but we're still going through my childhood and all that. We're not even up to Danny yet. I'm beginning to doubt that even an expensive psychiatrist can help me figure out how to get away from him. He does nothing but cost me money and waste my time with non-work-related activities. If I had met him when I was younger, I might never have become the cutthroat millionaire genius that I am today. So I know I could afford a driver, but as I've tried to make clear, I prefer to do as many things by myself as possible. I took a cab to work every day when I was in the city, and now I would drive myself. I became a fan of audiobooks because they would distract me from the fact that the traffic wasn't moving. In the city, I would move from my safe space at home onto the dangerous streets, but then quickly into a means of conveyance, and then back in a super clean, safe space at work. I barely had a chance to get dirty unless it rained or something. In that sense, very little had changed for me. I would get dressed for work, go into my safe space in my car, drive in comfort listening to whatever might amuse me, and then park in the company garage already inside the building. I remember one time I was stuck in traffic and I was watching some guys working to fix something on the side of the road. They were filthy. It was a hot day. They were laboring hard with their hands in the dirt, and they were a mess. Me? I was sitting in air-conditioned splendor listening to a violin concerto in surround sound, just a few feet away from them. I found I couldn't escape this newfound concept. How different life could be if you were just a few inches away, on the other side of a door. I resolved to try my best to stay on the nicer side of the door. After all, I'd spent my entire life there. And so it went until one night I was driving home after dark. There was so much going on at work that I was lucky to get to leave it all. The late nights were much harder now, having to drive over an hour to get home. I contemplated getting my own place in the city, but every time I started to talk to Danny about it, I chickened out. I was afraid he might take it the wrong way and think I would use it to have an affair or something. In actuality, I would just use it to get a little extra sleep. But I was not secure enough in my relationship, so there I was driving home in the dark. The first thing that made this night different from any other was that I found myself watching these odd, brightly colored lights in the sky. I don't know what they were. At first I thought it was a plane, then maybe a helicopter. They didn't have any blinking lights, though. I think all aircraft are supposed to have blinking lights for one reason or another. This one had red, blue, yellow, and white lights that would flash in a repeating pattern, sometimes making slight differences in the pattern. I was almost tempted to pull off the side of the road to watch them, but that would mean leaving my clean, environmentally controlled safe space and venturing out onto the side of a dark highway in the middle of nowhere with my French designer dress and Louboutin heels. I laughed at the idea. Imagine! Why would I ever do that? This was something that would never, ever, ever happen. And then suddenly, my car engine turned off, and we rolled to a full stop in the middle of the highway. Now, as you can imagine, this was my top-of-the-line Lexus, barely more than a year old, and it just died on me in the middle of the road? So I did what any logical person would do. I threw a temper tantrum, screaming every nasty word I could think of at this overpriced deadweight. I had forgotten completely about the colored lights in the sky. I don't even remember if they were still around or not. I got out of the car and looked around. Recognizing some landmarks, I realized I was nearly home and just had to walk through a small patch of trees to take a shortcut to the house. It was bright that night, either because of the moon or maybe those lights were still overhead. I was in too foul a mood to look up, though. I had to watch my every step through the forest or I would twist my ankle in my power heels, and that was not going to happen. So step by tiny, careful step, I began my trek into the wilderness. This was the first time I had been out of my comfort zone since the first time Danny asked me on a date. And this wasn't half as fun as that. I was completely absorbed in my troubles and feeling completely sorry for myself when I heard someone snoring. Snoring? In the middle of the forest? I stopped and listened. And listened. Then finally I heard it again. It wasn't snoring, exactly. It was heavy breathing. It sounded like it was coming from a man, and a very, very big one, too. These were not fun facts to realize. Before taking another step, I decided I'd better be certain which was the shortest way home and then get going, which is what I did. The only problem was that I heard that heavy breathing again, and it was coming from directly in front of me, directly between me and home. I saw Danny in my mind. Would I ever see him with my eyes again? I felt so sad I wanted to cry. Was this going to be the end for me? Would it be quick? Somehow I figured probably not. Illogically, I ran directly toward the sound of the breathing, screaming bloody murder. Then it stood up and I could see what was making the labored breathing. It was the most terrifying sight I had ever witnessed. It was a man, covered in hair, but his head was not the head of a man. It was the head of some sort of dog or wolf or demon. This was a living abomination. If I had been religious, I think that thing would have made me doubt the existence of good in the world. I was a businesswoman, though, so I recognized this thing for what it was. Pure evil. This thing was so evil it could have headed up any corporation. It was so vile it could have been a high-powered player in Washington or Silicon Valley. It was so innately wrong that it could have been one of those politicians that takes bribes from companies that profit off of death, then later goes to work as one of their lobbyists. This thing was so evil it could have been me. I realized the somewhat satisfying nature of this situation. I dished it out for so many years, and now, the first second I step out of my safe corporate bubble, the world decided to see if I could take it. I somehow weirdly felt like I deserved this thing. And then I saw Danny's face in my mind again, and I knew that if I were going to go down, it wouldn't be without a fight. I missed him so badly. I needed to get past this monster and see him again. Everything would be okay if I could just see Danny again. I took one defiant step toward the dog-headed creature, feeling that nobody could stand in my way. My determination was too strong. Then, the Dogman roared. Oh, I ran. I ran in a stupid direction, not toward home and not toward the relative safety of my car. I ran in a pointless waste of a direction, but I ran and then found myself back on the road. Panting and catching my breath, I saw our house about 150 feet down the road. Extremely out of breath, I started shuffling in the direction of home, trying to get my second wind. The Dogman screamed so loud I fell forward on my face. It was behind me, only about 15 feet and getting closer with each step. It had a sick smirk on its face, and I wondered what it was planning on doing to me. I took off one of my pumps and threw it at the monster, and I don't think the creature even noticed it. Getting to my feet, I threw the other shoe and ran. This time the Dogman let out a strange whimper, and it was whining like a puppy. I guess even evil dog demons from hell have weak spots. I'm one of the few people alive who can honestly say that I made a Dogman go, ouch. But the thing about hurting a really mean, cranky monster is it only makes him angrier. Case in point, this particular Dogman who resumed his pursuit of me with great vigor and extreme fervor. That is to say, he was barking and howling or screaming or however you'd describe that insane noise it made as it chased me. Danny heard the commotion and was in front of the house. As I ran past him, he was asking all sorts of questions, but my only answer was, "Get inside." Danny never saw what was chasing me. He never saw the Dogman. I'm not sure he even believes me, but I know that he knows that something happened that night. I was simply unable to continue to stay out there in the country after that. I'm a city girl. I realized that as much as I love Danny, I did not fit anywhere but inside civilization. I was willing to give up the relationship. That's how deeply I wanted to ensure that I'd never meet another Dogman in this lifetime. And so now, I live in a duplex penthouse apartment on the top of a very, very tall skyscraper. I have the downstairs, and Danny has the roof, where we've planted a small forest for him to paint. It has every kind of tree or plant he could want to draw. But there's one thing that mini forest will never have, and that's Dogman.
Welcome. It's me, your old pal Bigfoot. This episode is a special request from CS, who is our executive producer for today. If you want the best, you want CS. These are stories that originally ran before we even had a channel membership program, way back in 2016 and 2018. I did have to snip parts out here and there when we had subject matter in the stories that isn't allowed on YouTube any longer, but they are very minor changes and I don't think they ruin the stories or anything. All of these are read by either Madeline Starr, as in that previous tale, or PQ River, who reads this next story that we call
The Dogman and the Astronaut, as told to Peter Bernard, read by PQ River. This story happened to me when I was a kid. My parents told me it was a dream, but it wasn't. My older brother, who was 15 and my personal idol and hero, went through all this with me, and his version of the story matches mine. I think my parents insist it was a dream because they just don't want to accept that something like this could possibly be real. But this is the true story of how my brother and I saw an astronaut from space, and then we got chased by a Dogman. Let me start from the beginning. My brother and I slept in the same room on the second floor of our parents' suburban home. We were located on the edge of town, and our bedroom overlooked a small forest leading off into hills in the distance. In the winter, everywhere you looked was covered in white snow. On a sunny day, it could be blinding at points. I used to love spending any free time at all looking out the bedroom windows. In the summer, I would sometimes climb out the window and sit on the roof that was immediately outside. My mother hated me doing that, convinced I would fall, but it wasn't that steep an incline. Anyway, this wasn't the summer, it was the winter, and those windows were going to stay shut until the spring. So, our two beds both had their heads against the same wall, and we had one window in between the two beds. On the night in question, in the middle of the night, I was awakened by an incredibly bright light shining through the window, completely illuminating every corner of the room. I screamed for my brother, who told me to shut up and turn off the lights a few times. Finally realizing I wasn't going to give up, he sat up and stared around in as much shock as I was in. That was when I noticed that there was a sound accompanying the intense light. It was a low, throbbing sound, almost a white noise. We were both out of bed and looking through the window at the light and at nothing else but the light. In other words, we couldn't see anything out there other than this blue-tinged but unfathomably bright white light. I asked my brother what this was, and he told me to shut up, so he didn't know either. Then, suddenly from under the window, up rose the silhouette of what I can only describe as an astronaut. Now, the idea of an astronaut outside our second-floor window was impossible enough, but as I told you before, this window was only an inch or two above the outside roof I would sit on during the summer. If the figure had risen from under our window, did he rise up through the roof of the house itself? There was no room for it to squat under the window. Now that I've established the impossibility that this figure could be there, or could have been under the window before it appeared, let me describe what it actually looked like. This was not something that looked like a big-eyed gray space alien like you see on the History Channel. This looked like an astronaut. It looked like a man, albeit a short man, and this man was wearing an astronaut suit similar to the kind that the Americans wore to the moon back in the 20th century. The screen in front of the face was dark, and we could not see the creature's head, but it was humanoid in shape, with 5 fingers on each gloved hand. It seemed to have some sort of portable breathing apparatus built into the suit, and it bounced as though it were used to much heavier gravity. I remember backing away from the window in horror, but my brother did something that, to this day, he says he can't explain. He opened the window and tried to grab the astronaut. The creature, whatever it was, leaped backward and literally floated backward off the roof as though it were light as a feather. We watched it float back and forth, settling downstairs somewhere outside of our view. My brother shouted something about our dad, and we both ran to our parents' room. After trying to wake them up vigorously, we realized nothing we did disturbed their sleep in the slightest. It was as though they had been drugged or something. My brother shouted something at me, and we both raced downstairs, where we found the entire house lit up by that same intense light, and the deep, throbbing undercurrent of sound rose and rose to be strangely and oddly painful. "Let's catch that little astronaut," suggested my brother, and we both raced outside into complete and utter darkness and silence. Both the light and the throbbing humming sound were utterly gone. We couldn't see a thing, and we both had to stand there, waiting and hoping our eyes could adjust. One split second earlier, we had been inside the brightest room we had ever been in, illuminated from some source outside, The moment we stepped outside, though, someone had already turned out the light. My brother told me to close my eyes and listen until he said otherwise. I listened and heard my teeth chattering because I was standing outside in the middle of a February night in my pajamas and my slippers. "There," he whispered. "Look." I opened my eyes, and I could make out in the dark that my brother was pointing at a large bipedal figure walking away from the house through the snow toward the forest, leaving a trail of footprints behind him or her. "It's the astronaut," he hissed at me. "Let's get it." And off he ran through the snow toward the figure at his top speed. I wanted to tell him. I wanted to stop my brother and remind him that the astronaut was a small figure. He was Billy Barty-sized, not tall like that character out in the snow. I wanted to follow my brother, and I took one step into the snow in my slipper, immediately pulling back. It was far too wet, far too cold, and far too deep for me to run out in at night, even if there weren't a giant waiting on the other end to punish me for my effort. Feeling helpless, I stood there in the cold, shivering, and watching my brother running toward a giant that he thought was a tiny spaceman. I wish I had just stayed in bed. I wished this could be a dream, but it was too cold to be imaginary. My brother looked like he was closing in on the figure. It must have hurt him because it turned and faced him, bringing my brother to an immediate dead stop. Even from my distance, I could see that this was not the astronaut. This was not someone wearing a spacesuit. This was not someone wearing anything at all. This was a hairy monster. Bigfoot, I thought, but then the creature faced my brother, and it howled. I could make out that it did not have the head of a man, and it did not have the head of an ape. It did not have any kind of hominid head at all. This was apparently some sort of hairy creature with a dog head. Maybe a coyote head or wolf head. It didn't stand like an ape, though. It stood far more upright, like a human being. Its arms were longer, like an ape or like a dog, I suppose. I saw red eye shine. My brother said he saw yellow. We both ran toward the back door, trying to will ourselves back inside the safety of the house. Once I had gotten inside, I turned to see my brother running in a wild, panicked way, now in his bare feet, kicking and slipping on snow in all directions, scrambling toward me and the door I held open for him. And just beyond, I could see the dog-headed Sasquatch thing. It was running too. It was running a little faster than my brother. As a consequence, it was catching up. I felt like I was going to faint, so I can only imagine what my brother was going through. I could see his face now. He looked ridiculous, like a character in an Abbott and Costello Meet the Three Stooges movie being chased by a werewolf. He was crying like a little baby, and he was so panicked that his eyes were almost cross-eyed. That was the first time I had ever realized that my big brother was mortal. I could see in his face that he thought he was going to die, and he was terrified at the notion. This was overwhelming for me, and I found myself weeping uncontrollably, my heart pounding painfully in my chest as I waited the seeming endless moments to find out if my brother was going to be safe or if he was going to be ripped up like a piñata in front of my eyes. He made it inside, and we both slammed the door shut, locking and bolting it. Then, wordlessly, we braced our backs against the door, ready to put our all into the inevitable impact when that dog-headed ape-man hit the door. Ready to continue battling for our lives, we cried openly. I'm not ashamed to admit that I prayed to God for strength. It took a long while for us to accept that the impact had never come. Cautiously, We looked out the windows in various directions and found no Dogman in any direction. The sun was still not up, and not knowing what else to do, we went back up to bed. My brother changed into dry pajamas and got into bed. He suggested I do the same, but first I called him over to the window to see something I had noticed. "Those are your tracks through the snow, right?" I asked my brother, who nodded at where I was pointing. "That's where you ran out, and that's where you ran back." "Okay, so what's your point?" he asked me, tired and annoyed. "So," I asked him back, "where are the tracks of the monster?" His eyes widened as he understood what I was saying. There were no tracks in the snow where we had seen the monster walking. We saw him make tracks, yet now we could only see those made by my brother chasing the creature. So anyway, like I said, our parents decided it was a dream and told us if we kept having dreams like that, we were going to have to go see shrinks. And since my dad was perpetually broke, he told us that meant we'd have to get jobs to pay for our own psychiatry. Fortunately, we never saw Dogman ever again, and Dad didn't force us into therapy. To this day, and I wonder if there ever was really a Dogman there, or if the little spaceman created the monster as an illusion to scare us off? Maybe the little astronaut was afraid of my brother, and so he sent a Dogman hologram out to protect him? Or was the Dogman real, but the astronaut's pet or guardian? Could the Dogman have just been nearby coincidentally and attracted to the bright light in our backyard? These are just some of the unanswered questions we will live with until we die because of the night that we met the astronaut and the Dogman.
The Easter Hide Behind, as told to Peter Bernard, read by Madeline Starr. I'm the mom of 2 young children, a boy age 6 and a girl age 4. But this is a story about when my mom was a kid, back in the 1970s. It all got started because of my boy and girl watching some TV cartoon show on one of the Disney channels, I think. They had a character on the show called the Hide Behind that sort of freaked my mother out. At first, I laughed at the way she was acting, but I could see it wasn't funny to her. I asked what was wrong, but she didn't want to talk about it. All I could tell was that she was very surprised and unhappy, and somehow it had to do with this character on TV. After we had put the kids to bed that night, she told me the story that explained her reaction. Back in the 70s, my mother lived in a part of upstate New York where people used to let their kids walk alone to school or church, sometimes for miles and miles. She told me her generation was the last to do it, though. It started becoming controversial right about then, as the public grew more educated about child safety. But during that era, plenty of kids were still sent off walking alone. My mom said that she was 9 years old and her sister, Emma, was 7 the year this happened. Back then, her dad used to tell her that as long as she knew how to protect herself and her sister from the hide behind, then she'd be fine walking alone, even through the forest. But back then, the hide behind wasn't any cartoon, and it wasn't supposed to look anything like that character. The hide behind was a boogeyman. It was tall, hairy, and very strong. He would hide behind trees and wait for the perfect chance to catch you from behind. The hide behind would never attack from the front. In fact, if it ever noticed that you could see it, then it would act friendly or shy and just go away. The hide behind was skinny enough to hide behind any tree, so he didn't need to eat much. That's why legend said that sometimes he could wait for years and years, waiting for just the right person to sneak up behind and kidnap. Then that person would never be heard from again. I asked my mom how any creature could go years and years between meals, but she said she was just telling it to me the way Grandma and Grandpa told it to her. I admitted that it is interesting how the behavior of the hide-behind is so similar to the way people say Bigfoot behaves, hiding behind trees and peeking around, looking at humans. Then, if they are discovered, they tend to just walk away, which has led some to assume that Bigfoot means us no harm. Maybe they were just walking away because we had caught them before they could pull their planned kidnapping on us. What if the reason we haven't found definitive proof of Bigfoot is because all this time they've been hunting us as a food source? Or something even worse? Now it was my mom's turn to laugh at me. She said, based on a few words of folklore, I pointed out I wasn't the one who looked like I was going to faint over a TV cartoon character. And she got serious all over again. Well, that wasn't all there was to it, she went on, unsure of herself. I think it used to stalk us when we were kids. Me and Emma, I mean. I brewed some coffee, and we sat down together, and she told me everything she could remember. I'll try to sum it up into a story here for you. Basically, each Sunday, her mom and dad would either get into an argument or oversleep, and the girls would ask permission to start walking to church on their own. They'd save space in a pew, and Grandma and Grandpa would catch up to them later, usually just as the service was about to start. At first, it had been fun walking alone, hand in hand with Emma. Finally, she felt like a grown-up in charge of the situation, and she liked getting to boss her younger sister around too. But for the last few weeks in March and early April, every time they passed along this one patch of forest, it sure did sound like someone or something large was following along with them past the tree line. On Palm Sunday, Mom said she made a point of stopping before entering that area, and both girls deliberately walked slowly and quietly down the center of the dirt road. With dense forest closing in on both the left and right, she said that this time, instead of the crashing in the bushes she had heard the last 2 or 3 times, everything was very, very quiet. At one point, my mom says she got a strange feeling and turned around as fast as she could. For a split second, she says she saw the face of a very tall man making brief eye contact, then quickly ducking behind a tree. She says she screamed, which made her sister scream as well. Then they grabbed each other's hands and ran the rest of the way to church, screaming the entire time. Once they arrived there, several of the adults scolded them for shouting. When they explained what had happened, they got scolded for making up stories. Just then their parents arrived, brought them inside, and the service began. All that week, the girls tried over and over to tell their parents about the hide-behind. At first, both humored them, saying things like, "That's what you get for not respecting the area the hide-behind lives in." But after a couple of days, both parents lectured them separately that they were taking these stories too far, and that there really was no such thing as a hide-behind. Mom and sister decided between themselves that no matter how late they were to church, that they would never walk by themselves to church again, not as long as it meant walking through that stretch of forest. The next Sunday was Easter, and both girls got ready early. They liked Easter and were attending an egg hunt after church. As usual, their parents started arguing. My mother says she tried to get them to be nice, which only caused both of them to yell at her simultaneously, and order her and her sister to head off to church by themselves again. "Oh no, not on Easter," cried her little sister, who then began openly weeping. "Get out of here before I give you a reason to cry," bellowed Grandpa, according to my mother. So off to the church alone they once again went, Emma crying the entire way. Eventually they reached the beginning of the patch of woods, and Emma was shaking all over. She was trying to stop crying. She didn't want to make much noise when she was near those woods. "We're going to die," my mom says her little sister told her. "No, we're not," Mom said as confidently as she could. "You walk to church same as always, and I'll walk backwards behind you. If I keep an eye out for the hide-behind, he can't come and get you, right?" Emma's crying leveled off and stopped. The plan made enough sense to her, so Mom says she faced Emma in the direction of the church, and she stood back to back with her. At first they tried holding hands, but Emma said it hurt her shoulder socket, so they just started walking as back to back as they could manage. "Warn me of rocks so I don't trip," Mom says she asked her sister, who agreed in a shaky voice. Mom kept asking Emma to go slower, and she did try. They had made it more than halfway through without seeing or hearing anything. Mom says she was starting to calm down, but Emma's breathing was getting more and more nervous. Then, suddenly, she saw it. A big, big man covered in dark hair, but his head was not the head of a man. It was the head of some sort of dog, was staring at her from behind a tree, maybe 100 feet away. Seeing her looking at him, the man came out and walked onto the road that the girls were on. "What is that sound?" Emma asked. "Don't turn around," my mother says she ordered. The tall man continued walking across the road and disappeared quickly behind some bushes. "Keep walking, Emma, everything's fine," she said blandly, while trying not to faint. So they walked slowly, Emma forward and my mom backward. Soon my mom says she saw another face on the opposite side of the road. This one only about as high off the ground as her own. "A baby!" she gasped. "What?" Emma asked. Just then the baby face rose up and up and up until it was even further off the ground than the face of the previous giant man. This fellow also crossed the road and disappeared into the forest in a non-threatening manner. "It's nothing, Emma. Just keep walking," my mom said as calmly as she could. "You're not missing anything." The rest of the walk passed uneventfully, but once they got to church, Emma started bawling so hard that all the adults gathered around. By the time my grandparents arrived, the entire neighborhood was scolding them for making such young girls walk alone through the forest when it frightened them. As badly as my mom and her sister had been scolded the week before, their mom and dad received it twice as bad on Easter morning. Mom says Edith Brickle even offered to personally drive the girls to church, which shamed my grandparents into never letting this happen again. So, my mom told me, we never saw the hide-behind again, and I kind of put it out of my head. But hearing people make a joke about it on a kid's show? Her voice trailed off. "Did it offend you?" I asked. No. I'm not one of those shrinking violets who needs to be protected from joking around," she replied angrily. "If people want to make jokes, let them do it. All I know is the hide-behind is not funny to me, and it never will be." The next time my mom came to spend the night, I gave her and my kids a special class in how to survive a walk through the woods if you're being hunted by a hide-behind. I think it's information every kid should be taught.
Grandma Meets a Werewolf is told to Peter Bernard, read by PQ River. My grandmother was in vaudeville back when she was a kid and a teenager. She performed with her parents as a family act. She never rose high in the billing, and by the time she had grown up, the act wasn't getting booked at all anymore. She married an insurance salesman over harsh protests from her parents, and she settled down to raise my mom and then to be the grandma that I knew. Every once in a while, she would pull out an old show business story. The time either Wheeler or Woolsey made a pass at her, the time Chico Marx asked her for a loan and Harpo wanted her not to do it. But my favorite of her vaudeville stories didn't have much to do with show business at all. That's because my favorite story Grandma used to tell was the story of the time in 1916 when she claimed she saw an actual werewolf. When Grandma first started performing, she was only 5 years old. She would do comedy and play percussion when her parents sang. As she got older, the act became more and more about her. The family were often asked to come to dinner and stay over with well-to-do individuals who had seen them perform. It was always much better than the seedy hotels they stayed in when they could afford to stay inside at all, so they always accepted. Because Grandma was a cute kid, people naturally wanted to take care of her, and her parents capitalized on that. As Grandma grew into her teen years, however, they found out that not only did the act not work as well, but they got invited to dinner by the audience members far less often. When they did get asked to socialize, by that point, it was mostly creepy guys looking to get her alone. One night, soon after Grandma's 16th birthday, this guy seemed like a gentleman, invited her dad and mom to dinner at his place and said the family could stay over. All went well through dinner, but sure enough, he snuck into her bedroom that night and tried to get handsy. Grandma says she screamed for her parents, and the guy got really mad. He threw them and their luggage out of the house, with the three of them still in their sleeping clothes. They got dressed as well as they could right there in front of the man's house, then began the long walk back to the train station. Her father wanted to sleep in the station and get the first train to the next town they were booked to perform in. Her mother wanted them to get a room in the hotel near the station. Their quarreling got increasingly heated, but the night got colder and colder. They had been walking on a dirt road near the edge of a forest. Now Grandma noticed that the forest was still there, but she still wasn't sure in the darkness where the road had gone. Her parents were too busy saying hurtful things to each other to have noticed that they might not be heading in the right direction any longer. She told me this story 3 different times, and the facts were slightly different each version. I would guess I was there for the retelling of this story in 1971, 1972, and either 73 or 74. She died in 1975 at the age of 75, which was old back then. Her memory at the end might have been a little off, and my own memory may be playing tricks on me when I remember this, but in every version of the story, the next thing that happens is she looks towards the woods, and right there, in the first row of trees, she sees an incredibly large, hairy man with the head of a feral dog. She gasped and hid behind her father, who immediately began shouting toward the forest, and my grandmother realized that her father thought it was a guy from back at the house where they had dinner. She tried to explain to him that it was something else, something larger and more terrifying than that guy. Her father called to the woods angrily, demanding that whoever was there show himself. This was the last thing my grandmother wanted to happen. She pulled her father and mother's clothes, trying to get them to leave that area. Grandma said that they could see a shadow in the trees, and she thought it was going to come out and show itself, as her father had commanded. Instead, it howled. Grandma says her father and mother both went pale when they realized that she was right, and it was not a man at all pursuing them, but a giant carnivorous beast. They tried to move away toward the station as quickly as they could, but they were all carrying luggage, and women wore a lot more clothes back in those days. It was this whole thing. So the going was not very fast. Grandma told us she knew what it wanted was her. She also realized that if a beast that large and savage wanted her, it could have her, and there was nothing her parents could do about it. She was going to have to depend on luck, or the Dogman deciding not to take her for whatever reason. They still had over an hour of walking to get to the train station or any kind of civilization at all. Just then, a voice called out to them from their right. Squinting in that direction, she could make out light from lamps. They quickly headed in that direction and realized the calls were coming from an old man who was driving a wooden cart with his horse. He said he saw they had wandered off the road and wanted to warn them to steer clear of those woods at night. He told them that lots of folks wander off the road at night and are never heard from again. Grandma says she begged the man to give them a lift to the train station, but he had just come from that direction and had no need to go back till the next day. Finally, they offered him the amount they would have paid to stay at the hotel to carry them to safety, and he agreed. The three of them rode in the wooden cart in the back, watching the road behind them. Grandma said the moon was setting behind the trees and it was getting darker and harder to see. After a while, though, she started to hear sounds which seemed to indicate that they were perhaps being followed. It was all on one side, to her right, the side she'd seen the Dogman on. Grandma called to the driver to please drive faster. He argued that he was going as fast as he was getting paid to go, but he was interrupted by a loud growl coming from the darkness. "Yes, ma'am, I'll drive her faster." They held on tight as the speeding cart bumped up and down and side to side all over the dirt and stone road. Grandma says that as loud as the horse and cart got, she could still hear the thing following them in the woods. And then she saw it. They all saw it. Brazenly running right down the center of the road behind them was the hairy, dog-headed man she had seen earlier. You could see him for a second in the dim light provided by the lamps. Then he'd disappear back into the darkness, only to emerge again as he gained on them. He was even taller than Grandma had realized earlier. She said he was an insane feral caveman with a dog head. I remember asking her why she called it a caveman. Did it wear clothes? She said, no. Did it have long hair, like a caveman? She said no, it had dog-length hair, whatever she meant by that. Grandma seemed to feel that this was something prehistoric, and it had the basic body shape of a man, so I guess to her that meant it was a caveman or proto-human. So where was I? Oh, right. The Dogman was now openly running after their cart. She could see it had dark gray fur, darker and lighter in various areas, and that its eyes glowed like they were lit by candles. Even when it would fall back into darkness, you could still see the eye shine for a while after the body was completely in darkness. The monster snarled and snapped at them, making it very clear its intentions toward them were of the worst kind. Grandma said it had claws on its fingers and toes, but seemed like a furry man other than that, and the head. It ran like a man, on 2 legs. She said it never dropped to 4 legs. It was walking or running bipedally throughout the entire incident. One time she told us it had no tail. The next time she said she thought it might have had one. I think I forgot to ask about the tail the last time she told the story. It seems she mainly saw it from the front, and for that reason, I'm not sure she would have seen the tail much, whether it was there or not. So there it is. A werewolf or Dogman. It's gaining on them, getting closer and closer to their cart, and it has such a look of hatred on its face that Grandma said it was all she could do to keep from fainting. She's screaming at the guy to drive the horse faster. All of Grandma's family is screaming at the guy to go faster. Her mom and dad and probably all her dead ancestors too. The theoretical idea of me was probably screaming at this guy too. After all, if Grandma got taken by a dogman, I wouldn't ever get to be born. So, in the cart, Grandma now saw the lights of the train station. The dogman did as well, and it ceased its chase, allowing them to rejoin their own kind. Grandma said it just melted back into the darkness as they approached civilization, and that was the last she ever saw it, or heard of it, or anything like it. I asked Grandma if this turned her off to show business or to accepting invitations from the audience. She said back in her day you didn't have the option of being turned off to something. Life was hard. If you had a traumatic experience in the woods, you went back out there the next day as though nothing had happened. If a member of the audience turned out to be a psycho, you were just as friendly to the next audience the next night. There was no other option. It was about survival. "Didn't you know," she asked me, "I met your grandfather when he was an audience member after one of my last shows." Now that is the real story of why I quit show business, not the werewolf story. The werewolf encounter was just another night in vaudeville. Trust me. Grandma might have preferred to put on a brave face about it, but she wouldn't have retold the story so many times if it hadn't been a shocking and memorable occurrence, as opposed to just another night in vaudeville. She was a tough old lady, but even my grandma would have been no match against the savagery of a feral dogman.
Hey everyone, it's the new Henry Lee Dogman throw pillow. It's just like laying your face up against me, except the claws and teeth on the pillow won't tear you to shreds, hooray! Also, it doesn't smell like a wet dog, woohoo! Look right below this very video to find out how to order. It's the softest way yet to support the channel and keep us online.
My dog left me for Bigfoot, as told to Peter Bernard, read by PQ River. Back in early 2009, I'd just turned 30 and decided to go camping alone with my dog Terry. Terry was a golden retriever and my best friend. She and I had camped together since she was a puppy. We lived in Hampton, New York, which is upstate near the border of Vermont. We never had to travel far to find good places to camp, and we had built up a false sense of security, feeling as though the entire region was our backyard. This time for my birthday trip, we established camp literally less than a mile from my house and only planned on spending a 2-day weekend there, coming back Sunday evening. Friday night was uneventful, and we hung out together by the campfire, enjoying the quiet of the forest and crashing early. Saturday, we awoke early as we heard something thrashing around outside our tent. Terry was growling, and I got my rifle ready before opening the tent wide enough to look outside. What I saw was not what I'd expected. It was a pack of dogs. They'd knocked over my cooler, but hadn't succeeded in getting inside it. Not yet, anyhow. I shouted from the tent and got their attention. They didn't seem frightened by me at all and just looked. They appeared to be mutts, German shepherds and terriers mostly, but with darker fur. They'd probably been descendants of pets, but these dogs were definitely feral. One of them started growling at me, and Terry backed up behind me inside the tent whimpering. Not sure what else to do, I fired the rifle in the air above them. The sound surprised them, and they backed up a few feet each. That's when I heard loud cracking noises, as if some huge animal were about to emerge from the forest behind them. I mean, something very huge, like an elk or a bear or a freaking water buffalo. I saw the tops of the trees swaying as this creature, whatever it was, made its way toward the tree line. When it emerged, I almost dropped my rifle. It was a huge, hairy man who looked like he was wearing a ghillie suit. If he was a man, he had to be over 7 feet tall, and he had matching ghillies boots on as well. It also had the broadest chest I'd ever seen on anyone. This guy must have been the greatest athlete in history. Why he was wasting his time terrifying me in the forest instead of competing in the Olympic Games, I couldn't figure out. Then it let out a bellow, and I no longer considered it a human at all. I was pretty sure that my rifle would only make it angrier, and I realized that hairy thing now decided whether I would live to see another birthday or not. I withdrew inside the tent, and my entire life flashed before my eyes. Everything I'd done but wished I hadn't. Everything I hadn't done but wished that I had. I tried to pray silently, but the tears were streaming from my eyes, and I pet my whimpering dog. Eventually, the sounds outside the tent went away and were replaced with the song of birds. We waited an extra half hour before I grabbed what I could carry. We both walked the mile to our home. I figured I'd go back during the week to pick up my tent after I wasn't so shaken up by what had happened. When I got home, I really thought the entire incident was over. I napped most of the day and then got up to make something to eat. After dinner, I let Terry out to do her business behind the house and went upstairs to take my shower. This was our normal evening routine. Just before hitting the sack, I went out back to call Terry in, but got no response. Wandered around the property searching for her, but nothing. I had a terrible night, unable to get much sleep and haunted by nightmares when I could. I got 2 buddies the next morning and we launched our search of the area. None of us ever saw Terry again. My friends both thought she must have lost a fight with a bear or a mountain lion, but I don't think that at all. We never found a body, so I think Terry is still alive. I think she just went to live with Bigfoot and his pet dogs, that's all. I think she's probably the mother of a whole new generation of Bigfoot's pets. My friends think it's odd that I never got another dog after that, but it's not something I could ever explain to them or that they could ever understand. And, no, I've not gone camping again since.
Thanks for watching till the end. If you liked what you saw, please consider clicking like on the video or sharing it with your friends and family that you think might also be interested. If you would like to see more of our work, please consider subscribing and hitting that bell icon next to the subscribe button so that YouTube will alert you when we put out a new video. To become a channel member and gain access to our special perks, you can click that join link under each of our videos. Another option is to join our PayPal subscribers club at peterbernard.com. You can join for as little as 99 cents on YouTube or $1.50 at peterbernard.com, and that gains you access to our weekly secret uncensored episodes. If you'd like to see our 21 hours of archives of uncensored Dogman stories, then please join at the $3 level or above. To get to watch our shows in advance of the public, please join at our $10 level. That gets you all the perks. If you join our channel memberships, you need to check our community page here on YouTube in order to get the links to the secret videos and other perks. If you're in the PayPal subscribers club, Peter will email you all the news and links himself. Once joining the PayPal club, which is Peter's homemade club, please give him a chance to see that you've joined and to compose you a personal welcome email, as none of that is automated. But whichever you join, we'll name you an executive producer for the next available episode. Do you have a scary experience that you'd like to share with us? You can email us at scarystoriesnyc@gmail.com or call our Scary Stories voicemail hotline at 804-LA-SCARY. That's 804-537-2279. It's a Google voicemail box, so that means it keeps cutting off after every 3 minutes. If your story is longer than that, please keep calling back and we can piece it together on our end. Good night, and have a scary tomorrow.
Come back for some more scary stories.